NatRev MD, the podcast all about medical billing. I am your host, Dr. Heather Signorelli. Join us as we break down the ins and outs of medical billing, discuss the latest trends, and also share insights to help your practice navigate healthcare finances. NatRev MD is a physician-owned, full-service medical billing and coding company. Check us out at natrevmd.com. That's natrevmd.com. Now on to the episode. Welcome back to this week's podcast, all about the top things that we have seen that make healthcare practices succeed. As we all know, it does get very challenging to run a healthcare practice today. You have to have the right people, you have to have the right processes, and you really have to have the right focus to be able to grow and meet the needs of both your staff, your patients, as well as yourself in order to be successful. So today we're going to talk about those top 5 things that we have seen practices do well that help them succeed. And I think if you can take some notes and understand where you are with these top 5 things, it may be able to help relieve some stress, grow revenue, and help your practice continue to give you that fulfillment that you want. So first things first, identifying priorities and setting a focus. It is extremely important that every healthcare practice, the owners, have a focus around what do they want from the practice? What are the priorities of the practice? Is that stabilization? Is it growth? And really being able to outline that and actually write it down and share that vision with your staff and with your leadership team if you're large enough to have that. So, of course, this begins with, if you are the practice owner, having a clear vision and having a list of priorities that you want. And that may take some time, just you, yourself, sitting down and writing things down so that then you can have a clear picture. Then you can communicate that clear picture to your staff. So what we typically recommend is goal planning, right? And we do this in our own business. And I think many successful businesses really take the time to do this because, again, it gets everybody on the same page. Everybody's aligned to where you're going, what the plan is, and how you're going to get there. And this can be through multiple things. First, starting out with yearly goals, right? Identifying 3 major goals for the year. This could be expanding your practice, improving patient satisfaction, or just increasing revenue by a certain percentage, whether that's based on gross revenue growth or expense reduction, depending on where you see there to be an opportunity. And then what you do is you take those 3 major goals and you break them into quarterly goals. So then you can take them into quarterly objectives. So for example, if one of your yearly goals is to increase patient satisfaction, then a quarterly goal could be to implement a new patient feedback system, right? You've got to understand what's going on in order to improve it. So quarterly goals allow you to take those high-level things you want to achieve this year and break them down so that you can be task-oriented. Then next, you take those quarterly goals and put them into actionable monthly tasks and making sure that you're giving those tasks an owner, right? Is it you as the physician owner or you as the practice owner, or are you tasking those to your office manager or to your front office lead? So obviously, if we kind of go along with this same previous example, this may be in training a new staff member on this feedback system as that monthly goal. So again, you've got a yearly goal broken down into quarterly goals, broken down into monthly tasks, and then finally kind of those daily things that you need to do in order to contribute to those monthly tasks, right? So if you've set a goal, I'm wanting to improve patient satisfaction, and you've made this quarterly goal to implement that new patient feedback system, and monthly you're training the staff, then on a daily basis, you're either reviewing that feedback, discussing improvements, discussing, what feedback they got, or making sure that you're asking for that feedback. And that can be the daily task that, say, you're giving a front office staff member. So you can see how this can contribute and be able to help make your success greater if you have this all written down, if you have it communicated, and if you have a plan. So really, really highly recommend. I know it's already end of May, but if you haven't done this for 2024, it's never too late. You can still sit down, set those 3 goals, figure out how you're going to finish up Q2 and progress throughout the year. Now, the second thing that I've seen our really successful practices do is hiring the right people. And as an outsourced billing company, I cannot stress this enough. Hiring, obviously, the right people matter for any company. And where we have seen practices struggle is not having those right leaders in place. If you are going to have leadership roles within your company, or even if you're small, not having those 1 or 2 key people who bring the right culture, who understand the office dynamics, who understand healthcare and healthcare practice management. And those are all really, really key to having a successful practice or a successful company in general. So you really want to, think about when you're hiring for a role, really defining the expectations in your own head and the responsibilities that those roles are going to have, and really writing that down. And that can help create the job description. I think where we see companies and individuals fail in a role is when they either don't have the right skill set, they're not clear on the expectations of what is expected of them, or they're not able to communicate in either direction, right? The leader or the healthcare teammate isn't able to communicate where they're struggling or how they're not feeling aligned with the company's culture and goals for the year. You really want to make sure that when you're hiring for this right person, that they not only have the technical skills, but that they have the personality traits and the values that align with your practice. And so sometimes that means sitting down and really thinking about, what are the values of our practice? What is the mission statement? What do you value most when it comes to team culture and identifying somebody who's going to fit that role? Because you want to understand how you work, how you're expecting them to work, and make sure that those 2 things go together. Obviously, whenever you do put out a job description, you want those job descriptions to be clear. You want them to be detailed enough. And you want to have a mechanism to weed out the folks that are not A players. And so one of the things that we were taught when we were hiring our own staff is, right, you in the job description, you're telling a little bit about the company. You're obviously getting very detailed on the expectations and what the role requires. But then at the bottom, there's even a way you can, say, hey, I need you to send your resume here and call this number, right? So at the bottom, they have to get to the bottom of the job description. They have to follow directions, right? All things that you want A players to be able to do. So if they send in the resume to such and such email address, and you have them leave a message at a specific phone number. So you put a phone number like a Google Voice, you create a Google Voice, you put the phone number at the bottom, then they can call that number and say you have, 1, 2, or 3 quick questions on that phone message. They can then answer those questions on the voicemail. And if they go through all of those steps, those are the individuals you interview. Because when you put a job ad out, sometimes you can get 20, 30, 40 resumes in 2-3 days. But how do you weed out those that are truly interested, truly A players versus just the junk that you get? And this is a mechanism that we were taught, we've used, and I've seen some of our practices use as well. And I think that really helps you identify some of those A players. And then you can interview them, and then you can discuss kind of those expectations and roles of the responsibility, determine if it's a culture fit, and really identify that right person. Then once you find that right person, huge thing I see, businesses and practices do is they throw them in, right? And maybe they have some natural skill set that allows them to be successful in the role. But if they're not super duper clear on what they need to do every day, how they need to be interacting with the staff members, are they over certain staff members, right? Are they in charge of other people? And what are your expectations on meetings, on daily tasks, monthly tasks? quarterly goals, have you really sat down to be able to provide them with the tools that they need to be successful? And this is a huge reason why you see a lot of turnover, is if this onboarding experience isn't great. And so really sitting down in your own mind and coming through, okay, what are the things I do expect daily, monthly, quarterly? What do I do? What do I expect from a meeting cadence? What do I expect them to be able to accomplish in that first 90 days is really going to both allow them the answers that they need in order to know what they should be doing, but then also allows them very clear things for them to do, and also feels good, right, to them to be able to have something that they've succeeded in because they've known clearly what they're supposed to be doing. So huge part of the healthcare practice. It's also really important to identify those right people that are going to be interfacing with your vendors, right? So we're a third-party outsourced billing company, right? We're not in the office. And for us, I think one of the things I've noticed the most around the last, 3 years of owning this company is if we have the right person who can interface with us, get claims resolved when we have an issue, help with training the front desk. I mean, we can be the conduit, but we still need an individual in the office who's responsive, who's willing to help tackle challenges with us. I think of a billing company and a healthcare practice much like a marriage. It really does take really good communication on both ends, and something we really prioritize in our company. And it's something that I really push to have that open communication between the office staff and the billing team. And it has to be a two-way street, and really important to have the right individual on both sides. And what I've also started noticing is, we have different managers with different styles and different expertise in terms of subspecialties, and really aligning that with the office's expectations and the office's needs and the office personality and the office subspecialty is a huge key to success. And so these little nuances have really helped us and our practices be more successful, feel better about, where we're going, and help accomplish more together. So that was number 2, hiring the right people. Number 3 is making solid decisions. And this can go one of two ways, right? You can have a leader in a company or in a healthcare practice who's afraid to make decisions, right? They need so much data, they need so much, information in order for them to make a decision. So decision making can be super duper slow. And then on the opposite side of that is making decisions too fast, right? Moving too fast, not thinking about it, and just go. You really kind of need this happy medium between effective decision making and taking in the data you need, delegating where a decision doesn't take, the owner of the practice to do. And so you've got to have decisions that are based with a mix of data and intuition, with, of course, avoiding the trap of over-analysis. And so you want to have a calculated approach of what are the decisions the owner needs to make, what are the decisions, say, an office manager can make versus a front office lead, if you're large enough to have that, and really want to have this calculated approach around having certain data to inform your decision. And, for example, if we talk about billing, right, you want to be able to have data around, open charts, for example, or gross revenue, and being able to look at that data to inform how things are going in the practice. But you don't want to get so much into the weeds of looking at every single, claim and not being able to level up at the big picture when you're trying to assess a process. Obviously, as I mentioned, you really want to avoid over-analysis, and you don't want to get in that analysis paralysis, they say. And you got to trust your people, trust your intuition, trust your experience to make timely decisions. And of course, there's always this balance of getting input from your staff members versus making an executive decision. And so balancing all of this is really important. I think some of this is personality. I think some of it is practice. And I think some of it is having the right team so that you can delegate certain things and you don't have to make every single minor decision in the practice. And that does take the right people. So it kind of goes back to number 2, right? Hiring the right people. Number 4, Metrics, metrics, metrics. And I'll share an example. We were recently looking at a practice who had come to us asking for some help. They were really struggling with their billing team. And what it came down to is that they did not have any metrics. And actually their software did not provide the level of metrics that they needed. And I can't underscore this enough. Software is a huge part of the billing process and a huge part to you being successful. And this does, this is impacted by certain softwares. There's a lot of free software out there. There's a lot of software that, may have come with a practice that you were partnered with or whatever. But if it does not have the metrics that you need and an easy way to pull simple things, the practice is going to struggle. And things like accounts receivable, looking at accounts receivable by insurance, by patient balance, by CPT code to look at revenue by, different CPT codes or procedures is really, really important. You just can't skip this. And you don't have to have every single metric under the sun. And I do highly recommend, especially as a practice owner, staying high level with those metrics, right? You hire the right team members to get into the weeds. You stay up high, but you got to have those high level metrics and they've got to be trended and they got to be month over month. So you're going to want to track, everything in, the 5 metrics that we talk about in the billing world, which again are, your clean claims rates, your denials, metrics around AR, which include patient and insurance, AR over 90 days, and also looking at things like revenue and expenses and profit margins and cash flow, because all of this stuff is what allows you to understand the financial health of your practice. Now, you're going to want to think about operational metrics as well, right? Things like patient wait times, appointment cancellations, staff productivity, because then that can help you on the operational side of the business be able to determine where you have opportunity, what goals do you want to set around those, right? If you have no data, it's very difficult to even clearly articulate what your yearly goals are. Now, say you're, end of May, we haven't had yearly goals yet. That's okay. Sitting down and saying, I want to have metrics. That's a perfectly reasonable goal if you don't have any metrics, right? So you can think about billing metrics. You can think about financial metrics. You can think about operational metrics, and you could even think about performance metrics, right? And that's, staff performance, right? How are they doing at their job? Are they in the front desk? Are they rooming patients? Are they another physician or another, advanced provider who's seeing patients and you want to go through their own billing or their own patient satisfaction? So again, these are all different ideas around what kind of metrics you can measure, but you have to measure them and somebody has to watch them and track them on a month-to-month basis and understand them. And this is really key. So if, for example, for us, we are providing metrics out to our clients. Hopefully, everybody's sitting down and reading those and understanding those, if not meeting with our managers who meet with the practices, on a monthly basis and taking the time to actually do that on both ends. Operational metrics, it's identifying, what are some operational metrics that you want to look at. Maybe you've never looked at appointment cancellations. Maybe that's a good place to start because it's something that you can easily implement, no-show fees or processes around appointment reminders. And so there's things around metrics that if you grab those metrics, identify some goals, communicate again with your staff, then you can help make change within your practice. Some other examples of some metrics that I'll just share. We talked about, patient satisfaction, right? You can get those surveys out, get patient feedback, identify areas for improvement. For us and our own team, we did just send out our first, client survey. Obviously we have our managers meeting with our practices regularly, but we want to hear from them. It both, allow them to be anonymous, allow them to say, hey, I need more of this, I need less of this. So those sorts of things are offered. Obviously, a revenue per patient. What is the average revenue generated per patient? And that can be super high level, right? How many patients did you see last year? What was your gross revenue? What is that on a per patient basis? You could even look at that on your top 5 CPT codes across multiple payers. And so lots of different options here to be able to measure things. The other thing is appointment utilization. How many appointments are booked? How many available slots? And then really looking at optimizing scheduling within certain time points, how you're going to manage new patient versus established patient visits, how you're going to tackle no-shows or cancellations, and really be able to implement strategies to impact each of those. All right. Last but not least, this last tip we have is something that I have noticed trends in different practices, and that's about taking calculated risks. We have, a variety of different practices, different practice sizes, different subspecialties that we oversee billing with. And I will say building a successful healthcare practice involves taking calculated risks. Now, of course, these risks should be, well considered, right? You're making the right decision. You're thinking about, when you're making a decision, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? And making sure that, you're taking all of that into account, but really taking calculated risks. And for example, we've had some practices in the past who were worried about implementing that new software. Gosh, and they go through 100 different things that, could go wrong, right, in the transition to a new software without really thinking through what are the things that are going wrong today with the current software, right? What lack of transparency do you have in metrics? What struggle do you have with your billing process? What level of transparency do you have in your current software that is impeding business operations? And when you're thinking about taking a calculated risk, right, taking a risk to move to a new software or move to a new billing team, you're not thinking about the things that you could improve. It's just always worrying about what could go wrong. And now, of course, you have to balance that, right? But at the same time, we've seen practices who have taken that risk and said, what I'm getting right now is not enough. I'm going to take that calculated risk and I'm going to make that change with my software. I'm going to make that change with my billing team. We're going to have a planned out transition and we're going to get to where we're going. And so it's really important when you're thinking about risk, whether it's risk in hiring a new provider, risk with changing software or vendors, all of these things really you're going to want to do three things, right? You're going to want to assess potential outcomes, right? Evaluate that best and worst case scenarios for any decision, right? So if it's expanding your practice, it could increase revenue, but also may strain resources or increase expenses. So you've got to really think through, is it the right time to expand your practice? Do you have the patient volume needed to add a third provider, for example? Obviously, you're going to want to plan for contingencies, really having a plan for how to pivot if things don't go expected, or have a plan around what are the check marks that you want to check off in order to go to that next phase so you feel comfortable and confident that you're going to be able to do it successfully. And then the last is risk versus reward, weighing those potential rewards against the risks. If the potential benefits significantly outweigh the risk, then it may be worth taking the leap. So in conclusion, today we talked about those top 5 things that we're seeing successful practices use, both in coordination with our billing services as well as independently. And it really hinges on things like clear goal setting, strategic hiring, informed decision making, but not becoming, having analysis paralysis, effectively using the metrics or creating metrics if you don't have any today, and of course, the willingness to take on calculated risks. So by focusing on each of these key areas, both independently, if you're the physician owner or the practice owner, or with your leadership team, is really, really important to build that robust and thriving healthcare practice. And of course, be able to continue to grow your revenue. So I hope that this week's podcast helped you kind of frame through what you should be thinking about as we get ready to finish up quarter 2. Again, it's never too late. And if you are looking for a new billing team, head over to NatrevMD, NatrevMD.com. Fill out your practice analysis if you're interested in kind of seeing a first glance of how things are going in your own practice, or shoot us an email at natrevmd.com, and happy to set up some time to go through you and your practice's needs. I hope you have a great weekend and are enjoying getting ready for summer. We'll talk to you soon.